spent 38 years building something, not just a business, a life. A real one, with calluses on my hands from the early days and a few gray hairs that came honestly. My name is Leonard Beaumont, and I'm 64 years old. And the story I'm about to tell you is not one I planned on sharing, but here we are. My wife, Patricia, passed away 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't apologize. We had 41 years together, and I won't say they were all easy, but they were ours. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, who kept a garden even when her knees ached, who made the house feel like it had a heartbeat. When she was gone, the house went quiet in a way I hadn't been prepared for. My son Colin called me 2 weeks after the funeral. He was 35 at the time, living up in Charlotte with his wife Renee and their 2 kids, my granddaughter Abby, who was 9, and my grandson Tommy, who had just turned 6. Colin said, "Dad, we've been talking. We don't want you down there alone. Come stay with us for a while. I want you to understand something. I didn't need to move in with my son. I owned my home outright. I had my retirement accounts, my investments, and the sale of Beaumont Finishing, the flooring company I'd built from a 2-truck operation in a rented warehouse to something with 40 employees and contracts across the Southeast. When I sold it, 4 years before Patricia died, the number that hit my bank account had 7 figures in it. I was not a man in need of charity. But grief does something strange to a person. It makes a quiet house feel like a punishment. And Colin's voice on the phone sounded sincere. So I said yes. I rented out my own house in Savannah, kept it, never sold it, and drove up to Charlotte with my truck and 2 suitcases. They had a guest room above the garage. Nice enough. I told Colin I wanted to pay my way, that I wasn't going to sit in his house and eat his groceries for free. He said, "Dad, please, you don't have to." I said, "I know I don't have to. I want to." We settled on $2,500 a month. I also paid for groceries every week, handled the landscaping bills, and paid for the kids' extracurriculars without being asked. Looking back now, I think Colin genuinely meant well in the beginning. His wife, Renee, is a different story. She was polite to my face. Cordial. That particular kind of polite that's really just the absence of warmth. She never said anything outright, not in those first few months, but I noticed things. The way a conversation would stop when I walked into the kitchen, the way she'd ask Colin questions about finances when she thought I wasn't near. I told myself I was being paranoid, an old man rattling around in someone else's house, reading into things. Then her sister moved to Charlotte. Her sister's name is Pamela, and I say this plainly. Pamela is the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately starts calculating what's in it. She came over for dinner one Sunday, and somehow, I don't even remember exactly how it came up, the subject of Beaumont Finishing came up. I mentioned I'd sold the company. Pamela asked what I'd sold it for. I deflected, said enough to be comfortable. She pressed. I said I'd rather not get into numbers at the dinner table. She smiled and said, "Oh, of course," and changed the subject. But something shifted after that dinner. I could feel it. The way you can feel a change in the weather before it arrives. Renee started mentioning things. The kitchen needed to be remodeled. She'd been putting it off for years, but wouldn't it be wonderful to finally do it? Colin's car had 200,000 miles on it. He really should get something newer. The neighborhood HOA was talking about updating the community pool, and it was such a shame they didn't have the funds. Little comments, casual, never directed at me directly, but always said within earshot, always in that tone that was asking without asking. Then in March, this would have been about 14 months after I moved in, Colin sat me down one evening. Renee was upstairs, but I could feel her presence in the conversation like a third person in the room. Colin said they were thinking about doing an addition on the house, a proper master suite, because the current master bath was too small, and with property values going up in the neighborhood, it would be a smart investment. He said they'd talked to a contractor. The estimate was $140,000. He looked at me. I looked back at him. He said the bank was willing to finance it, but the interest rates were rough right now, and if I wanted to contribute, as an investment, he said, as an investment in the property, it would really help the family. I didn't say yes. I also didn't say no. I said I'd think about it. I went back up to my room above the garage, and I sat in the chair by the window, and I stared out at the streetlight for a long time. I called my accountant the next morning. I called my accountant the next morning. I called my attorney the week after that. I didn't say much to either of them, just asked some questions, made sure my affairs were in order, made sure my name was not on anything in that house. I said nothing to Colin about the addition. The weeks passed. Renee got quieter. That particular kind of quiet that isn't peace, it's pressure. One evening in April, a Tuesday, I came home from having dinner with an old friend of mine, a man named George Whitfield, who I'd known since our kids were in Little League together. I walked in through the garage door and heard voices in the kitchen. Renee's voice, mostly. I caught my name. I slowed down. She was telling Colin that it wasn't right, that I was living in their house, eating their food, using their utilities, and sitting on a fortune I clearly wasn't going to share, that she hadn't signed up to run a retirement home, that the kids needed things, real things, college funds, the right opportunities, and that it wasn't fair for that money to just sit there when family needed it. Colin said something I couldn't fully hear. She said louder, "Then you need to talk to him." Actually talk to him. I walked into the kitchen. They both went still. Renee had the look of someone who'd been caught but had decided not to apologize for it. Colin looked at his shoes. I said I heard most of that. I'd like to know if there's something specific you want to say to me. What happened next is something I still think about on long nights. My son, who I had coached in baseball, who I had driven to college orientation, whose wedding I had helped pay for, looked up at me and said, "Dad, I think it might be time to talk about whether this arrangement is still working." I waited. He said, "Renee feels like you being here is creating some tension, and maybe it would be better for everyone if you found your own place. We can help you look." I said, "Are you asking me to leave?" He looked at Renee. She didn't say anything. He looked back at me and said, "I think it would be for the best." I nodded. I said, "All right." And I went upstairs. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I did not say any of the 100 things that were moving through my mind at that moment. I sat on the edge of the bed and I breathed and I thought about Patricia and what she would have said, and I knew she would have told me to keep my dignity, so I kept it. I called George that night and told him what happened. He said, "You doing okay?" I said, "I'll be fine." He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Exactly what he asked." Over the next 10 days, I was methodical. I found a furnished apartment in a high-rise near uptown Charlotte, while I figured out next steps. Nice building, Dorman. A view of the city I actually liked. I had a moving company come on a Saturday when Colin and Renee had taken the kids to Renee's parents' place. I packed my belongings, stripped the room clean, left the key on the dresser, and I drove away. I sent Colin a text that said, "I've moved out. I hope you and your family are well. I'll be in touch." That was all. Now, let me tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, because this is where the story becomes something I did not plan, but also do not regret. The $2,500 a month stopped, of course. I had been paying it automatically by transfer and I canceled it the day I left. But that wasn't the significant number. What Colin did not know, what neither he nor Renee had apparently thought through, was that I had been covering 4 other things quietly. The kids' private school tuition, which ran $11,000 a year per child, the family's health insurance supplement, the house's security system subscription, and the pest control and HVAC maintenance contracts, all of which I'd set up and paid for without making a production of it. Those things stopped too. Additionally, and this is the part that required my attorney, 3 years earlier, when Colin and Renee were buying the house, they'd had trouble qualifying for the full mortgage. I had co-signed. More than that, I had quietly made supplemental payments to bring the principal down faster, because I didn't want my son carrying unnecessary debt. What I had never done was add my name to the deed. The co-sign arrangement had terms. My attorney helped me review them. I also had a will, an old one, written years ago, that left a substantial portion of my estate to Colin. I had always planned to update it eventually. Now, I had a reason to move that up on the schedule. I'm not going to say I did this out of anger. I did it out of clarity. I sat with my attorney for 2 hours and I made decisions that were calm and considered. Colin's share was restructured into a conditional trust, manageable in the long run, not a windfall up front. The unconditional bequest went to Abby and Tommy directly. in education trusts they could access when they turned 21. My grandchildren had done nothing wrong. They were not going to be punished for their parents. I also made a sizable donation to the Patricia Beaumont Memorial Fund I had established at our church in Savannah. That felt right. 3 weeks after I moved out, Colin called. I let it ring. He called again the next morning. I answered. He said he'd been trying to reach me. I said I knew. He asked why I hadn't responded. I said I'd needed some time to think. He asked if I was okay. I said I was doing well, that I had a comfortable apartment and I'd been getting out more than I had in years. He said, "Dad, I'm glad." And then a pause. And then, "There's some stuff I wanted to talk to you about." The school sent a notice about the tuition. And the insurance thing. Renee got a letter that said the coverage had lapsed. I said, "Yes, I canceled those when I moved out." Silence. I said, "Colin, when you asked me to leave, I understood that to mean our arrangement was over. I stopped paying for the arrangement." He said slowly, I didn't think about all of that." I said, "I know." He said, "Dad, the kids' school." I said, "The children have education trusts in their names that I've set up separately. They will be fine. Their futures are provided for. But the day-to-day household support, the tuition, the insurance, the maintenance, those were part of an arrangement." The arrangement ended. Another silence. Longer this time. "Can we meet?" he said. Can we sit down?" I said yes. I told him I'd meet him for coffee on Saturday, just the two of us. He said, "Okay. I want to tell you about that Saturday morning because I think about it often." We met at a diner near his office, not far from the house, a place we'd been a handful of times before. He was there when I arrived. He looked tired. Not the tired of a bad night's sleep, the tired of someone who'd been doing the math for weeks and not liking the answers. We ordered coffee. We talked. He told me he'd spent the past 3 weeks realizing how much I'd been contributing that he'd never consciously acknowledged. He said Renee and yet argued. He said he'd told her, and I give him credit for this, that what they had done was not right. He said those words to my face. "What we did was not right, Dad." I didn't let him off the hook immediately. I told him that what hurt me most was not being asked to leave. I understood that sometimes living arrangements don't work. What hurt was that the conversation he and Renee had been having about me, about my money, about what I owed them, was a conversation I'd never been invited to, that I had never been asked. I had been maneuvered. And then when the maneuvering didn't produce what they wanted, I'd been shown the door. He sat with that. He didn't argue. He said, "I know, and I'm sorry." I believed him. I want to be honest with you. I believed him my son was sorry. But sorry and trustworthy are two different things, and I have lived 64 years and I understand that distinction clearly. I told him that I loved him and I loved him children, and that door would never be closed between us. But things had changed. I would not be moving back in with him. I would not be restructuring my finances around his household. The education trust for Abby and Tommy stood. Our relationship could continue, dinners, holidays, the things that matter, but it would continue on different terms. He nodded. He looked out the window for a moment. Then he said, Is there anything I can do?" I said, "Just be honest with me going forward. That's all I've ever wanted from you." He said, "Okay." We hugged in the parking lot when we left. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't complicated. He is my son, the same boy who used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from baseball games, and I'd carry him in from the driveway. That doesn't disappear. But I walked to my car with my back straight and I did not look over my shoulder. That was 5 months ago. I'm still in the apartment near Uptown. I've actually signed a longer lease. Turns out I like city living at this stage of my life. I take walks along the Greenway in the mornings. I've started having dinner with George and his wife on Thursdays. I flew out to see my college roommate in Portland last month, something I'd been meaning to do for 6 years and kept postponing. The guest room in Portland had a mountain view, and we stayed up too late 2 nights in a row talking about things that mattered to us when we were 20, and things that matter to us now. I see Abby and Tommy on alternating weekends. Colin drops them off, and I take them to the Children's Museum, or we cook something together, or we just walk around and look at things. Tommy recently decided he's interested in coins, old ones, historical ones, and we've been going to antique shops on Saturday mornings looking for things to add to his collection. Abby wants to be an architect. She draws floor plans of imaginary houses. I keep them on the refrigerator. I think about Patricia a lot in the evenings. I wonder sometimes what she would think of how I handled all of it. I think she would have been angry on my behalf. She was protective in that quiet way that didn't make a fuss but didn't forget either. I think eventually she would have said I did right by the grandchildren and right by myself, and that life is too short to spend it being someone else's safety net, while they treat you like a burden. I didn't set out to have a lesson at the end of this. I'm not that kind of person, and I don't think life hands you lessons on a clean plate. But if there's anything I'd say to someone listening to this, maybe someone in a situation that feels familiar, it's this: your peace is worth more than their comfort, and the people who genuinely love you don't add up your net worth before deciding how to treat you. I drove back through Savannah last month to check on the house. The tenants have kept it beautifully. The garden Patricia planted along the back fence is still there. The new people have been maintaining it, which surprised me and moved me more than I expected. I stood at the back fence for a few minutes and looked at it. Then I got back in my truck and drove north toward the city, toward my apartment with the view, toward Saturday mornings with Tommy looking at old coins, toward a life that still has a great deal of good in it. That's the whole story. Draw whatever conclusions you need to from it. I've thought a lot about the word arrangement. It sounds cold when you say it out loud, like something between strangers, not a father and his son. But that's what it was. An arrangement. And the moment Colin looked at his shoes and told me it would be for the best, the arrangement ended. Not just the money, all of it. What I've come to understand, sitting in this apartment with its city view and its mornings that belong entirely to me, is that what happened between Colin and me didn't start the night he asked me to leave. It started much earlier, in all the small moments neither of us addressed. The conversations I overheard but didn't confront. The requests I deflected instead of answered directly. The contributions I made quietly, almost invisibly, as if keeping them invisible would keep the peace. I told myself I was being generous. Looking back, I think I was also being avoidant. I didn't want to see what was already there. That's the thing about choosing not to look. The situation doesn't wait for you. It just develops on its own while you're looking elsewhere. Renee and Pamela did what people with a certain kind of thinking will always do when they sense an opening. They calculated. They maneuvered. I don't say that with the heat I once felt. I say it plainly because it's true, and because understanding it clearly is the only honest way to move forward. Colin made his choice, and it wasn't the one I'd have wanted from him, but he made it. And there are consequences to the choices we make, not because someone engineered them as punishment, but because that's simply how actions work in the world. You ask your father to leave your house. The support your father was providing quietly and without fanfare stops with him. That's not revenge. That's arithmetic. What I'm more interested in now is the question of what I'm building in the time I have left. Not rebuilding, building. Because the life I had with Patricia was its own complete thing, and I don't want to reconstruct it from scratch as if she were just a missing piece. She was her own person, and our life together was its own era, and I've made peace with the fact that it's over. What's in front of me is genuinely new. The Saturday mornings with Tommy looking at coins, Abby's floor plans on my refrigerator, dinners with George and his wife where we laugh about things that don't matter and talk seriously about things that don't matter and talk seriously about things that do. The flight to Portland I'd put off for 6 years, the garden Patricia planted that strangers are tending carefully in her absence, as if they understood something about what it meant without being told. There's a kind of intelligence that only comes from going through something hard and choosing, deliberately, not to become hard yourself. Colin said he was sorry, and I believed him. That matters. It doesn't change what I decided about the finances or the will or the terms going forward. But it matters to me as his father that he found his way to those words honestly. I'll take that, and I'll build on it, carefully, with clear eyes this time. I'm 64 years old. I still have decades of good years ahead if I'm fortunate. I intend to spend them with my back straight and my judgment intact, and my grandchildren knowing that their grandfather is someone worth knowing. That's the whole inheritance, really, not the accounts. That